I don't really like long games. They take up so much time and take forever to get through. And usually they're long and not because they have so much content that they need such a longer game, but because it's the tedious nonsense. That's why I'm not too obsessed with the RPG genre, especially JRPGs. You spend so much time in random battles or slowly fighting turn-based enemies, it's excessive. I feel like bigger and more controversial target to attack in the JRPG genre would be The World Ends With You, mostly because I found that game to be atrocious, went on forever, and yet I don't think I've heard anyone call that game bad before. But it's been quite a while since I played it last, so I don't think I can give it a fair review right now. Instead I'm going to go for Shin Megami Tensei Persona 3, which is a game which has a ridiculous amount of filler, like 50 hours worth. Let me preface this by saying that if Persona 3 were a 25-hour game, then it would actually be decent, but it's a 70-hour game, and most of the game is a complete waste. See, there are two main parts of the game. I played the PSP version, so part of the game is point-and-click life sim. You just sort of talk to people and do things to establish relationships with other people. This part of the game actually is decent because it actually has content. Then every night you have a choice to fight monsters in a dungeon called Tartarus. This part of the game has you roaming a dungeon, killing monsters, and collecting treasure. Tartarus also has to be one of the worst dungeons in all gaming. But it's simply, Tartarus is the majority of the game and it's a complete bore. That means that most of Persona 3 is horrendously boring. Like watch a bunch of movies and TV shows on Netflix that suits the tedious boring. There are over 250 floors on the tower, and each floor is randomly generated, whereas they all look the same, just boring square corridors with some treasure hidden in one corridor and stairs in another. They get a design change every 20 to 40 floors or something like that, but it doesn't make much of a difference to the tediousness of it all. Sure, you could potentially just run straight through Tartarus going to the stairs on each floor immediately, but you'd be seriously underleveled. You need to clear all the enemies on every floor, or else you'll lose to all the bosses, or sometimes just normal enemies. As for the combat, well, it's okay. There's an interesting thing where you hit an enemy with an effective attack, you get to attack it again, so strategizing is interesting, but the enemies in Tartarus eventually just start repeating themselves except in other colors, and it's at that point that you start to realize you're playing the most repetitive game in existence. That's right, the most repetitive game in existence. Really? Atlas rehashed the same enemy designs for tougher enemies in a dungeon that rehashes the same floor 250 times? So besides the worst grinding ever, how else is the game? The story is decent, but it's not a masterpiece or anything. It's not like you're so on the edge with suspense that you need to keep playing even if you have to go through some boring dungeon. No, usually the game is fairly calm narrative-wise because it takes 4 weeks in game time for anything groundbreaking to happen. See, stuff only happens pretty much on the full moon. Now, this isn't a terrible system, and it probably would work if 4 weeks didn't feel like 4 years with the whole Tartarus thing. So, do all Persona 3's flaws come to one thing, really? For the most part, yes. Or, at the very least, it makes all the other flaws invisible. Luckily, there is a very easy mode on the version I played, so I'd actually recommend that, unless you think wasting 50 hours on a repetitive dungeon sounds fun. So, some games can do randomly generated levels right, like The Binding of Isaac. That game managed to stay fresh by having tons of content and variations of level rooms and enemies and things and bosses every time you play. Had Persona 3 had randomly generated floors akin to something like Binding of Isaac, it could have fared better in my eyes, and I wouldn't be talking about it right now. Still, I don't think a 50-hour dungeon like that could ever be justified. I could understand critics and fans liking this game, but it does baffle me how, when this game gets talked about, the dungeon crawling aspect doesn't come up as a detriment to the game itself. It's really just a big problem, and it holds it back from greatness.